what we were discussing in the last class. So for different stages, we get the inputs and outputs. Right? So we see in the output we have products as well as byproduct, or in our case we know them as emissions. So like the last end of life, that is the last phase of the packaging box. Then it is going for incineration or landfill. There are three options: landfill, incineration, or recycling. So emission is, for example, incineration emission, and of course heat. Similarly, here also you can see bleaching process. You have emissions like this. Here you have somewhere recovery. Okay, so you have to prepare a list, right? And then, as I mentioned, that we need to link these emissions to different impact categories. Like in this case, CO2 is linked with global warming potential, and CO is also linked with global warming, and methane also linked with the global warming. NOx, for example, is linked with acidification potential and eutrophication. So finally, when you prepare that inventory table, so per functional unit you have emissions. Let's say 1.3 kilogram CO2, 3 kilogram CO. Then 1.3 multiplied by 1, this is the characterization factor for CO2. CO2 equivalent, we are converting everything into CO2 equivalent. And this for CO, this factor is 3. What does it mean? So it means that 1 unit of CO is having 3 times more global warming potential than unit CO2. So this is calculation. So, and then 6 kg of methane is there. Calculation factor is 25. 25 to 6. The total CO2 equivalent is this. Same is with, let's say, acidification potential. So here equivalence is in terms of SO2. This equivalence unit can change depending on which method, which protocol you are using. So this is as per the protocol. For NOx, characterization factor is 0.7. So this is the quantities of SO2, NOx and HCl, and these are the characterization factor, and so on. Same is with eutrophication potential, right? So now if I go back to this, where is that example? Right, this example. See what we did in this example. For functional unit, for all three, or actually there are 4 different, I won't say the phases, 4 different sub-boundaries of the whole. So this is the boundary. I can come back to that. So this is the whole, this whole is the system boundary. So cradle to gate, right? So you have 4 subsystem boundary: plant A, plant B, and plant C, and 4th is transportation. and transportation is largely from plant A to plant B. So we have divided the total system boundary in 4 subsystem boundaries, right? All data we collected. Then this example is only for CO2 emission or global warming, greenhouse gas emission. So greenhouse gas emission is we are getting from burning of fuel, combustion of fuel, and electricity. So there are two type of oil, two type of fuel which we are using. One is diesel, another is oil, and then electricity. So now 3: oil, diesel, and all 4 entities or all 4 subsystems: plant A, B, C, and transportation. So oil is being used in plant A and plant B or maybe C. We can refer to the last one. Diesel is being used only in transportation, and electricity is being used in plant B and plant C. Right? So that is, we converted everything into. So electricity also we converted into in terms of fuel. So this is finally we got the oil and diesel. Okay. And since we are interested in so what next we would be doing, that this is the energy of total energy of the whole. If I take the total system boundary, this is the total energy being used: 200, 350, and 505 megajoule per functional unit. Okay. Then this will be converted into. Then conversion efficiency is, let's say for oil 0.32. Calorific value is given for oil, right? So that is 48 megajoule per kg. So we will be able to calculate how much total fuel is used per functional unit. Is that okay? And then we have to go for the literature, finding out, and of course we need to consider the efficiency also. So total mass burning we can calculate for oil, for diesel, and then per unit mass of oil or diesel there will be some characterization factor. Okay. This characterization factor also depends on what kind of, so when you go into detail, so then you also need to look at the process, which kind of combustion system they are using. So every combustion system or every different technology will have different type of emissions. So for example, if you have high temperature combustion, then NOx will be more, right? If you have fluidized bag kind of combustion system, of course in diesel that is not there, but I'm just giving you an example, then temperature will be low. So depending on the, so when you look at the characterization factor, or not characterization factor, sorry, emission factor. So there are two things. One is emission factor and another is characterization factor. What is the difference? So suppose you are burning 1 kg of coal. Okay. So this 1 kg of coal will be giving you some CO2, some C, some particulate matter, depending on the sulfur, some sulfur dioxide, and so on. Right? Some hydrocarbon will be released as an emission. And then of course NOx. And the quantity depends on combustion system. If you have efficient combustion system, then CO by CO2 ratio. Hypothetically, I don't want any CO2 get released, isn't it? So if 100% efficient system, that means no CO will be released. So for every combustion system, you will have, so characterization factor means what? So per kg of coal burning, how much will be the CO2, how much will be CO, how much will be NOx. And NOx quantity depends on what? Temperature and excess air. Right? So all that detail is needed. And this is recorded in the database. So not every time you need to, so what you have to identify the process and then look at the database. So let's say you will say that my boiler is this type, my coal is this type, or my fuel is diesel, fuel oil, coal. Based on that you will get some emission factor, and then emission factor. So for example, now you calculate, you found out how much CO and CO2 are getting released per kg of coal burning, then characterization factor, right? And see, the basis is functional unit. Basis is not per kg. Ultimately, what is the basis? Ultimately, the basis is per functional unit, not the per kg. So everything you convert in terms of some unit. So for example, here you will be calculating emissions or CO2 equivalent, let's say per kg of coal. Finally, what you will be calculating for one functional unit, how much coal is used. And this is how you convert GHG emission per functional unit. Is that clear or any doubt? Is that clear or you have any doubt in this? Okay. Right. Already I have mentioned that we have these codes, IS 14040, which talks about the principle and framework of LCA, 14041 goal and scope, 14042 impact analysis, the methodology, 14043 interpretation. So now we have only 14040 plus 14044. So 41, 42, 43, they are combined together and put it into a single code, that is 14044. Okay. This I mentioned in the last class that these are the softwares. Popular ones: Gavi, CIMAPro, OpenLCA, Clipchamp. And most of these softwares are linked with the research group. So the research group started working on LCA in early 21st century. They developed their own spreadsheet initially, database, and then finally into a software. So this has got two components. Software has got two components. One is database. Database means what? Database mainly means the characterization factor. Okay. And as I mentioned that this database is based on certain principles. So like for example, but it also has got emission factors also. So emission factor and characterization factors. So for example, this what is the CO2 equivalent of carbon monoxide, or what is the CO2 equivalent of methane? This is not decided by EcoChain or CIMAPro or these groups. No, they have taken this from a certain protocol. So for GHG emission, for example, the protocol is IPCC document, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So they come up with the IPCC report, they decide. And of course that is a very intimate process. With a lot of research, they come up with this. Emission factors or so finally database will have, for example, they will be doing a lot of internal calculation. and then they will be saying that 1 unit of electricity is linked with this much of global warming potential or this much of greenhouse gas emission. Okay. So when you use software, all that data is not visible to you. You just know what you do, that in my process I am using, let's say, per functional unit 100 units of electricity. So result you will be getting that with 100 units of electricity consumption, GWP will be this, acidification potential will be this. So this is there in the data, this is coming from the database, right? Now very interestingly, as an engineer you must understand two things. One, you must understand the process. Okay, I'll take very different example for that. Second, you must understand the context of that data. For example, you have you are calculating emission factors, or you are calculating emissions from a boiler. Okay, and you just choose any database. It will ask you what kind of fuel you are using. It is not necessary that the fuel for which you are doing the calculation that is available in the database. So if you are using a database which is predominantly created in Europe or Western world, they may not have biomass as a fuel, because they are not using biomass as a fuel. They are using coal, diesel, oil, this and that. Now, for this, Gabby or CIMAPRO or these people created exhaustive inventory. So what is the process actually? If suppose you decide to create inventory for any particular industry, let's say for say leather industry, what you will be doing? You will be doing exhaustive material energy balance for that technique. For each unit operation, and for each unit operation, for each equipment, you will be doing detailed inventory. What is the input, what is the output, what is the input, what is the output. And output also, what are the emissions, right? And then you can create your own database. Based on that, and you go to the original research work, find out the characterization factor of each element or each compound, and then create your own database. Is that clear? So don't, when you start using any software, don't become blind. You must understand the process very well. You must know that what actually you are doing. Database will be giving result which is not visible to you. They just do some calculation at the back end and give you some result. Okay? Right. So I think this we discussed what is the purpose of LCA. So industry organizations they use. So purpose depends who is doing LCA, who is performing LCA. But that's fine. This I think we have discussed. Already discussed this function unit. Fine. Okay. So this is a typical sheet for a refrigerator. So how much steel is used? So what are the materials? So suppose you want to understand the impact of a refrigerator. This is a typical sheet. How much steel is used? How much iron is used? All the materials: aluminium, copper, rubber, polystyrene, right? Their weight. Okay. Lifetime. Hours they use, power required, right? Transportation required in manufacturing process. Steel is so steel, you will be looking the database, what are the emissions or what are the impact of cold rolled steel. So process you know now, right? Plastic is you are using, it is coming from manufacturing process injection molding. Aluminum extrusion. Right. So with this, so you will go to the database, find out that what are the emissions linked with 1 kg of steel which is produced by cold rolled process. As I mentioned, again there will be difference. Difference because even this cold rolled steel making process will have different emissions in different countries depending on type of ore, depending on kind of efficient process they have employed for converting ore into mineral into ore into iron into steel. So all that can be different, and which if you change the context, your values will change haywire. Okay. I don't know if we have example of that electricity. At this time, do you have that old presentation? Okay. You can open that. Right. So quickly, okay, after this. So I quickly go through the units, and when I am showing this, I am typically taking one. So this is adopted from EcoChain. One protocol I am following. So you may have different unit in different. So ozone depletion unit is kilogram chlorofluorocarbon level equivalent. Right? Description you can see. This is an indicator of emission to air that causes the destruction of stratospheric ozone layer. Okay. Climate change is or global warming potential. In some protocol it is known as GWP. Indicator of potential global warming due to emission of greenhouse gases, here divided into 3 subcategories based on emission source. Fossil resources, bio-based resources, and land use change. Acidification. So, acidification, if you remember the example which we took, what was the equivalence? What was the unit? Remember? Kilogram SO2 equivalent. Here, they are not using SO2 equivalent, they are using kilogram mole proton. Because H plus ion is the ultimate, H plus ion is responsible for acidification. So ultimately they are going to the to that level. Okay. So one table I will show you. This is a typical example. Data sheet is very old, so maybe the factors are changed, but you will be able to understand the difference. When I say contextualization, so you will be able to understand what I mean to say. So basically this is emission data for electricity, right? Now if you look at electricity, there are 3 things in electricity. Or one is generation, then transmission, and then finally the usage, right? Generation, we have how many ways of generating electricity? 1, thermal power plant, 2, hydro, 3, nuclear, 4, wind, solar. Okay. In thermal, it can be coal based, it can be diesel based, it can be any biomass based. Even let's say if I go to coal also will have 2 or 3 different technologies. One is conventional technology, conventional technology with heat recovery or supercritical thermal power plants, right? All these three different categories may have now. If I say, let's say compare conventional thermal power plant with supercritical thermal power plant. Efficiency, let's say there is a difference of efficiency by 2 points or 3 points. Emissions are mass based. If you are burning 1 kg of coal, if it has got 0.1% sulfur, so based on that you will be calculating how much SO2 is formed and how much SO2 is emitted. Suppose my efficiency improved, what will happen? For generation of the same unit, I will be consuming the lesser amount of coal. Right? What does it mean? Emission factor is going to change because there will be lesser emission. If I am using diesel, which has got further lesser amount of sulfur, then emission factor will be, and combustion efficiency is also better. Right? So with every new thing or every different thing, emission factors are changed. Okay. Let's say I am using, as a consumer, I am getting 1 unit. For this 1 unit, the grid is sending, so there is a loss in between, transmission loss. What is the transmission loss in countries like India? Any idea? Any guess? Power transmission loss. 5%, 1%, 2%, 10%, no idea? कोई आइडिया नहीं, कुछ आसपास का थोड़ा बहुत आइडिया रखते हो नहीं रखते हो? हाँ, any guess? Any wild guess? 10%? 5%? 25%. Who is 25%? Yes, it is more than 30%. It was more than 30%. Right? And this transmission loss can be anything. The actual transmission loss, right? And transmission loss due to non-recovery of bills. Can be anything, right? But transmission loss in India was more than 30%. Of course, now they are trying to reduce this transmission loss. So you might have seen that they are using insulated wires for power transmission. You must have seen that. So there is an insulation, and then they are. So this is helping in 2 ways. One, transmission loss as such is less, and theft is also lesser. Okay. Now you may say that I am a user, I am using 1 unit. Why should I bother emission? I mean, I am not bothered. Ultimately, I am using just 1 unit. But when you calculate emissions are actual. So the power generation, electricity which was generated, let's say 50% loss. And as a nation, I have consumed only 1 unit, for example. But ultimately, the generation was 2 units. 1 unit is lost. So as a nation, we generated 2 units. So the emissions, so the coal consumption, fuel consumption is related to 2 units of generation, isn't it? So that is why all these factors are considered. Okay. So let's see if I have. Yeah. This is the table. So let's say, so this is 2010. We should update this, but anyway, so for India you can see the emission factor is 1.44 per kilowatt hour. If I have consumed 1 kilowatt hour electricity, then I am emitting 1.44 kilogram CO2. And this is, they have divided it into 3 categories: direct, indirect and losses, right? And then you compare with Australia. So Australia is also not far behind. The major difference between Australia and India is the transmission losses. Generation, so Australia, South Africa, even China, they all are majorly getting electricity from thermal power plant. That is why the emission is higher. Of course, so whatever the difference is there, it might be due to some, this difference is because of the generation technology, that's all. But if you look at the electricity, so carbon emission in France, or maybe in Russia, Canada, that means that they are using electricity from some other sources, and those sources have lower carbon emissions. So for France, for example, 75% of their energy was coming from nuclear energy. Right? You remember I mentioned this earlier also. Does it mean that electricity generation from nuclear energy is safer or greener? I am just talking about CO2 emission. Other impact categories I am not focusing right now. So that is why I always say, when you look at LCA, it is very important to understand the impact categories. And that is why it is more important to understand the whole process. Inventory has to be done. So the another drawback of using software blindly is that you never know what is the process, what are the emissions, if you are missing something. So don't you go for this black box approach. First you try to analyze your system, and then of course you take the support of software. So this is incomplete information until unless I know what is the distribution, how electricity is being generated. This is very useful information if I just need to calculate global warming potential, or I just need to calculate the carbon emission. But this information is incomplete if I am looking at the perspective of whether this electricity in France is greener than electricity generation in India. Right? Okay, so this is what I just wanted to highlight. Okay. Right. So one sheet, I think we can understand. I think this we covered this sheet. What else is remaining? Let me just see. And then we can. Right. So these are some protocols. So CML, eco indicator. Okay, I'll come to that endpoint. Recipe endpoint, some of the popular protocols. Tracy. So basically these are the research groups, and the Gabi, SEMA Pro, these are the software companies. They select one of these methods. So let's say Gabi will be using for endpoint. I think Gabi is, SEMA Pro is using Recipe. Pratishtha? Recipe is one of them. So they will be choosing certain methods, right? And you can see that not every method is focusing on all type of midpoint categories. Okay. Now, what is endpoint? Every time I am talking about impact category, but actually I am talking about midpoint categories. So let us understand this first. So this I think we discussed previously also. So earlier we were just calculating impact on midpoint categories. But as a user, or I don't differentiate. So like the previous example, the electricity one, I mentioned that just saying CO2 emission, just knowing CO2 emission does not mean anything to me, because I'm not able to understand whether the process is green or not. So to overcome this problem, midpoint category is converted into endpoint. Endpoint is something which is the final impact. And as I previously discussed, final impact will be either on human health, natural environment, or natural resources, depletion of the resources. These are the three categories. So climate change will have impact on human health, ozone depletion, human toxicity, then particulate matter formation, photochemical ozone. All these 5 midpoint categories are contributing negatively to human health. Natural environment, climate change, ozone, then photochemical ozone formation, ecotoxicity, acidification, eutrophication, land use, water use, all are contributing to the. So they come up with, instead of midpoint, they come with endpoint. And endpoint is, the unit is not in terms of equivalence. There is a uniform unit for a particular method. Okay. And they have conversion factor. So midpoint to, see, from each midpoint will have a different category. Let's say I am saying that human health is linked with climate change, ozone depletion, human toxicity. Let's say 3. All 3 of them have what? 3 different units. Climate change is kilogram CO2 equivalence. Ozone depletion is chlorofluorocarbon. Right? And what was the other one? Human toxicity. Right? Now, this all need to be converted into a single unit. Right? So, that information we do not have. So, this is a comparison of 2 different research methodologies, CML and Tracy. Global warming in both the cases is CO2 equivalent. Ozone layer is R11 here, CFC11 in Tracy. What does it mean? That eco chain is using Tracy method. Right? Acidification SO2, and there mole H plus ion. Eutrophication phosphate, in this case phosphate equivalent, there it is nitrogen equivalent. So you can see practically for except global warming, in all the cases they have different unit of equivalence. Right? That is why you have to be very careful when you compare results of from 2 different research papers. You always must look at the method there, and it also creates confusion, isn't it? So if you are very new to LCA, you will see that somewhere it is written SO2 equivalent, another paper you find that it is H plus ion equivalent. So basically it is a difference of the method, that's all. Right? So if you understand this basic thing, then probably so this is a method eco indicator 99. Okay, I'll talk about this EH and I also. Right? This I think we discussed. Explanation of any term. Climate change I think we discussed earlier. Okay, many times you see this also, GWP 100, GWP 20. What is this? So 120 means 100 years and 20 years. Now, characterization factor will be different for 20 years and 100 years. Why? Because not all gases have what? So they have, not only they have different potential of global warming, they have different staying time in atmosphere. So one gas may be more effective or more contributing in long term, another gas is contributing more in short term. Right? So that is why characterization factor will be changed. So, and this is not from any research group. This differentiation is from the protocol team, that is IPCC in case of GWP, right? Somewhere you also see, I just mentioned E, H and I, right? So basically, how do they calculate global warming potential? So like there is a difference between 20 and 100 years. So they do some analysis, and based on and this global warming potential also will change in different scenarios. For example, if I don't say we are emitting greenhouse gases, so greenhouse gas, so the impact of any next emission depends on what is the existing inventory available in the atmosphere. So like in economics, we talk about theory of margin, isn't it? Marginal benefit. Here also, impact depends on how much is already there. So there are three different scenarios. If I keep on continuing at the pace which I am at present, then impact will be worse. If I have started doing so this means what? This means that there is a growth in CO2 emission. So if I follow that, there will be some impact. Second scenario is, if I arrest the emission at today's level. Suppose today I am emitting, globally we are emitting 100 tons of CO2, let's say. So what will be the scenario if we stop it here? No further increase in 100 tons. So that is the second scenario. Then impact of additional CO2 emission will be different. You got my point or not? I think, okay, let me explain it again. I am emitting CO2. I am calculating global warming potential for 100 years. So what will happen during these 100 years? CO2, scenario 1, CO2 is keep on increasing. So every year there will be some additional impact. Second scenario, CO2 remains constant. Okay. Third scenario, we decide to implement certain programs and we decided that CO2 start decreasing. Okay. That is why these three different scenarios. Okay. And that is why we will have, so this is a matter of selection. What we choose. That's all. Okay. Any question you have? Otherwise we can close down this. This is another example. Yeah, some steps I think we can quickly see. This is how the sheets looks like, inventory sheets. So I think I'll go back to the okay, scope of the study. We've discussed scope of the study, function and functional unit. Okay. System boundary we had discussed. Inventory analysis, data collection, I think I have talked about calculation. I think this is common whenever we are working with data. These all points are common. So this finally the sheets look like this. Okay. Material inputs, units, quantity, how you took the sample, like emission to air, units, quantity, sampling procedure, emission to water. And see, there is a footnote. If you can read out this footnote, it talks about the emissions which you need to capture. You need not to. So, for example, it says that for inorganics, emission to air, chlorine, CO, CO2, particulates, chlorine, H2S, H2SO4, HCl, HF, N2O, ammonia, NO2, SOx, and organic hydrocarbons, PCB, dioxide, So they are listed so that you don't miss anything, right? In the experience, it is all there in ISO 14044, right? In addition, with your knowledge also you can add some emissions, right? So if you know that yes, dioxins and fuels are coming out from the plant, you immediately know that toxicity is there. So you also need to calculate impact based on toxicity. If you are sure that with air emissions there is no possibility of dioxide, fuels or any halogen based gases, toxicity related to human toxicity particular is out of question. Okay, right. So this, yeah. So during functional discussion, I mentioned that, for example, your mobile has got different functions. Okay, then you have to link. Finally, the emission. So you calculated emission linked with the manufacturing of one mobile. Okay, but then not all emission is linked with the data voice or the voice call. Some of the emission is linked with camera, some of it. So this also I think I mentioned. Sometimes we omit certain things. So if you remember this refrigerator sheet, let's say, you find that PVC is very small quantity. So you are not bothered about PVC. In comparison to total weight of the, so whatever emission is there with the PVC, you are leaving it. Because ultimately it is the, the more material you consider, the larger is the system boundary, cumbersome will be the calculation. So you decided that this decision can be based on mass, this decision can be based on energy. So any particular process, for example, within industry there are 10 processes. One process consumes very less energy. You just leave it. Okay, let's say raw material preparation section in paper industry. You have operations which consume very less energy, which consumes very less water. You are not interested to include that into your system boundary, since it might not be, it will be adding to your work, but not making any difference in the results. Okay. Of course, this is a iterative process, the whole calculation. Right. So example. So in the process, your product making product A, product B, mass is 0.9, 0.1, but energy. So the ratio is 10 to 1, 10%. B is. But if energy consumption in product A is 99 megajoule and product B is 10 megajoule, then product B is insignificant. Why to bother with product B? Why to include product B into your system boundary? Just do it for product A. Okay? Right, I think we had discussed enough examples. I hope things are clear to you. There are limitations, we have discussed so many limitations during the discussion. Right? So it all depends on system boundary, goal and scope, who is doing with what is the intention while doing the LCA. So even the database itself is a big question mark. I don't have data for Indian industries, I am using the data from European industries. It may not be, that may not be, okay. I think let's close it down. So some of the emission factors, P is equal to A, EF emission, okay. This is the emission from, so I already talked about this. So you can do this. Can be, so one of the very interesting exercise as far as, so one thing is very good about LCA, that it gives some quantitative result. When you say X process is greener or X with X product, if you buy X product, your impact on environment is high. But then what is the degree of that? When you say it is high, what is that degree? So one good thing about LCA is that you can do some very good, very fast calculations. This is a very limited example, of course related to carbon footprint. You must have heard about this term quite often. Carbon footprint. Right? So carbon footprint is nothing but CO2 equivalent emission from any activity. That is known as carbon footprint. Okay? So many times I say this example, take this example, again to caution you with this term. So they say that when you send an email, you are saving this much of carbon footprint. You are not using paper, so this is the saving in the carbon footprint. But then I always say, carbon footprint is fine. But what about toxicity? Where this computer will go? What about the resource depletion? How a hardware is being manufactured? Right? And after disposal, what will happen to that? So, but still, I can say that for a very quick comparison, this provides you a very good opportunity. So, for example, you can calculate in a housing how much electricity is used, how much fuel is used, how much waste you are generating, how much water you are using, and for each use you just have, so let's say this much of kilowatt hour per year you are using. This is the emission factor. You get the emission of CO2. Natural gas, this is the unit you are using per year, emission factor. So this is how you can calculate emission from. If I ask you your carbon footprint, how will you calculate that? Your clothing, your consumption, basically it is your consumption. Food, what kind of food you are consuming, right? As I mentioned that there is a transmission loss. If you are using a fresh food or processed food, same calories, or same amount, where will be more emissions? So processed food will have more emissions because of one, of course, the supply chain, transportation. Another, production of processed food will lead to certain wastage. Right? They have to process it. There will be emissions related. Fresh food, you can immediately consume. So whatever emissions are related with fresh food is mostly related to the preparation of the ingredient. But processed food, so your lifestyle actually, so you can calculate. So like let's say housing, you can calculate what kind of housing you are living. Then of course you divide it into, you are not the only one who are living in the house. So there are 4 members, you can divide it into 4. Then travel, how much travel you are doing with different type of transportation, bus, metro, taxi, rail, flying. Okay. I'll come to this later. What kind of food you are consuming? For every food, there will be different emission. So some list is given. Okay. How much? What is the consumption pattern? Okay. Clothes, medical, recreational. Right. So with this, you can have some calculation. Services. What are the services you are using? Of course, this data is I have taken from some literature. This can be different. But as far as comparison is concerned between two individuals, you can always see how much carbon footprint. And this is good to create awareness among the children, among the youth about the responsible consumption. Directly you know more the spending you are doing on recreation, traveling, communication, more the footprint you are generating. So more consumption, more footprint. Okay. This is the last slide I am just sharing. So with the travel, you see, you have 2 different type of emissions. One is direct, another is indirect. So direct is while traveling, while driving, fuel is used. Okay. Indirect is the emissions during manufacturing. So next time when you go, next time means whenever you go for buying a car, look for the luxury, of course, but look for the emissions also. Right? So one of the biggest difference between 100cc bike or 125cc bike and 300cc bike is not the money you are spending, but is the carbon footprint. So 300cc bike will be consuming more fuel, will be emitting more. Even in the manufacturing of 300cc bike, more material is used. So direct or indirect, both emissions are more than that. So I think that's all. I'll share this PPT with you, and if you have any doubt, you can have one hour extra class with 1 hour session with Adisha. Right? You can plan that. Now I come back to the discussion which we left before the break, before I hand it over to Pankaj. Can you open that? Rahul. Oh, so we were discussing cost benefit analysis. Probably we were at the point where we were discussing the impact of interest ratio. Can I do a very quick calculation? Can all of us do quick calculation? 2 different interest rates, 5% and 10%. Okay. What will be the value of If today we have 100 rupees, what will be the value of this 100 rupees after 5 years, 10 years, 15 years and 20 years? Quickly. Got my question? I am depositing 100 rupees today in the bank. What will be its value after 5 years, 10 years, 15 years and 20 years with two different interest rates, 5% and 10%?